Hello, this is lecture number 8 of the 24 of the 25 lectures that you're going to have this semester. And in fact, this lecture today is going to be a rather short lecture. I want to have a review following this in preparation for your first examination, which will take place the next time that we get together. Now, the last time we were together, we talked about a lot of things, which we always do, to include that of the Stamp Act, and the Currency Act, and the Sugar Act, and the Mutiny Act, also known as the Quartering Act. We talked about the Boston Massacre, and we also talked about the Boston Tea Party, and even the First Continental Congress. And I hope by now you recognize the First Continental Congress did take place September 1774, took place in Philadelphia at Carpenters Hall. And we had all colonies represented, so all 13 colonies were represented with the exception of one, and that was Georgia. So in other words, we had 12 colonies to be present there. Now, as I promised you last time, I had forgotten to bring out a photograph of Carpenters Hall, so I'm going to flip over to my camera here and let you see what Carpenters Hall looks like. It's part of the National Park Service today. You can visit there if you wish. It's kind of a fun place to visit. This is not Independence Hall. It's about 2 blocks away from Independence Hall. You can actually enter into the first level right here. You'll not go up into the second level, the second floor here. And the First Continental Congress did not meet on the second level, to my knowledge anyway, but they met on the first level. Not very far from here, you can find a burial site there to Benjamin Franklin, and right across the street from there you can find the home of Betsy Ross, and you know what I'm talking about with that. Alrighty, so anyway, let's move on and get started into this short lecture today. And where I want to take you to, let's go to Boston, Massachusetts, and the events we're going to talk about here is 18 and 19 April 1775. It's going to start late in the night here on the 18th of April and then continue on all day through the 19th of April. Now, the commander of the King's Army, the King's forces in North America, was John Thomas Gage. Thomas Gage, 56 years of age. I don't know why I told you that. That has no relevance whatsoever to this. He was married to an American, and when I say an American, of course, she is British because all these people that live in the colonies here, by and large, are British. But she was married to a Margaret Kimball Gage, who was from New Jersey. And there is evidence to lead us to believe that perhaps she was being an informant or a spy against the British and informing these patriots what was going on. And sure enough, we had patriot spies that were hanging around the bars, the saloons, and it's easy to get information, particularly if you have soldiers around, because soldiers like to talk shop. And when they do so, all you have to do is just have an open ear, a listening ear, and you can find out what's going on by and large here. And so nevertheless, the patriots, they knew something was going on here and that the British were planning some kind of exercise to go into the countryside. All right, now I want to introduce you to 2 individuals. One individual by the name of Samuel Adams, his Sons of Liberty, a Liberty Boy. We've talked about him before. John Hancock. And John Hancock, a very, very wealthy individual. But both of these individuals were members of what was called the Committee of Safety and Supplies. And they met quite often at a saloon, a tavern, which was called the Black Horse Tavern, located at Monotony. Now, if you're following in your textbook on page 124, you can look at the map here, and I hope you always follow along in your textbook. You can look at the map there, and you'll see a town there which is called Arlington. Now, Arlington is the current name for Monotony. Monotony was the name of the town back at that time. And this was where John Hancock and Samuel Adams and the Committee of Safety and Supplies frequently met. So anyway, Thomas Gage, General Gage, was given an order to arrest those 2 individuals. And he kind of slow-footed on this, and he wouldn't send out a company of men or squad of men to try to detain Samuel Adams, John Hancock. And then it was rumored that there was a weapons catch. And I'm talking about a large weapons supply of gunpowder, musket balls, and maybe even some cannons that were present in nearby Concord. Now, Concord was 18 miles away from Boston. Now, on the way to Concord, 12 miles away, we find a town which is called Lexington. So for the Army to pass to Concord, you've got to go through Lexington itself. And so nevertheless, the Patriots were aware that something was going on. So what they determined is that they were going to devise a signal system, whether the British would come across the Charles River or whether the British would go around a long way through Roxbury. So the system worked out something like this, in which they would take a lantern, 1 lantern or 2 lanterns, and they would illuminate these lanterns, 1 or 2, in the belfry here of the Old North Church. Now, if you look in the background here, we can see the North Church here. Here it is right here, the belfry, which is up there. And the reason for this is that we had some alarm riders. Let's see if I have the alarm riders. There we go. The alarm riders, one of which was Paul Revere, and the other was William Dawes Jr., Paul Revere and William Dawes Jr. And so the signal that was worked out for the Old North Tower here, if the British were going to go by land, then one lantern would be illuminated. If the British were going by land, then one lantern would be illuminated. If the British were going to cross the Charles River, the two lanterns will be illuminated there. All right, now we've all heard that old poem there, one if by land and two if by sea. Well, there is no sea. The water route would be that of the Charles River. Let me try to show it to you in a different perspective here, and I'm going to use your textbook map here, which is on page 124 in your textbook. So let's try to position this properly anyway. All right, so let's take ourselves over here to Boston, and here's Boston here, and I'm going to show you several different maps here. So, in other words, if the British were going to cross by boat and cross over to Charlestown right here, then how many lanterns would be illuminated? Well, that's water there, so that's two lanterns. Now, if the British were going to take the longer route, such as this, and pass around in this fashion right here, then one lantern would be illuminated. All right, so the alarm riders, Paul Revere and William Dawes, were both on the alert for this. And when it was determined that the British actually were going to cross the Charles River, then Paul Revere ordered that two lanterns be illuminated from the belfry of the Old North Church here. And with that, Paul Revere now set out. He was rowed across the Charles River, find a pointer here for that, and he was rowed across the Charles River here, and actually they had to muffle the oars to keep from being heard here with the petticoats of a female that volunteered those items there. And so Paul Revere rode through the countryside here, through Charlestown, and alerting the people there, the army's coming. And we've always heard this, the British are coming, the British are coming. Well, all these people are British, so that would be kind of ridiculous to say the British are coming. So the army is coming. And for Paul Revere, he rode in this fashion here, knocking on doors, alerting them that the British were coming. And actually, Paul Revere rode on through Menotomy, which is Arlington here, and continued on, and went up into Lexington. All right, now I'm going to interrupt myself for just a second, because William Dawes Jr. will serve as the alarm rider to ride in this direction right through here. Again, alerting the people that the army was coming here. Now, when Paul Revere arrived in Lexington, he went to the Clark House, and this is what the Clark House looks like here. You can visit there today as part of the National Park Service, and that's where John Hancock and Samuel Adams were staying. And I know everybody always asks me, were they sleeping together? I don't know. I don't have a clue, and I doubt it, but I don't really know about that. So anyway, Revere went up, knocked on the door there, and got the attention of Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and alerted them that the British were on their way. And so those two individuals just headed off into the woods and hid away. In the meantime, for Paul Revere is going to return and continue his ride, and he will make it to about here. This is where Concord is located. This is where Lexington is located. And Revere was captured right there. He ran right into 3 or 4 cavalrymen, and they took Paul Revere into custody. He'd later be released in Lexington itself. All righty, so anyway, fortunately, we did have another individual, and this individual, who was a doctor in that area, Dr. Prescott, saw that Revere had been captured here and saw what was going on, and he rode on into Concord, and he alerted the 150 Minutemen that were present there. In the meantime, back at Lexington, 77 Minutemen under Captain John Parker had been alerted, and of course they fell out on Lexington Green, formed up in a formation there, realized it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and decided, well, this is kind of ridiculous, let's all go home, get a few hours of sleep until first light, and it will all form again on Lexington Green. All right, so let me get this away from here, and let's see what else I have. Now I want to reinforce what we have here. This may be a little bit overkill with this, but I want to go to Boston, and this is a current map of Boston. And here's what I'm trying to display to you folks, demonstrate to you good folks, is that when Paul Revere was rowed across the Charles River, he was rowed across in this fashion here. over into Charlestown. We'll talk about Charlestown next lecture too. And for William Dawes alerted the community by going in this direction here and then around through Roxbury in that fashion. All right. So anyway, so in the meantime, here came the British. And the British, of course, coming by water and crossing the Charles River. And I guess as a second thought here, General Gage realized that his plan had been discovered here, and so he sent out a second group of men, and the second group of men, about 1,000 British soldiers here, essentially followed the same path that William Dawes Jr. had taken here. So anyway, that was a group of about 1,000 under Lord Earl Percy. So anyway, so the major group here is going to leave out of Boston. Let me just flip back to me here. The first group is going to leave it out of Boston. It's under the command there of a Francis Smith, 56 years old, I believe it was, a little bit overweight. He was commander of the 10th Regiment. The leader of the Royal Marines, and second in command, was a Major John Pitcairn. I'll show you a likeness of Major John Pitcairn in just a little bit here. Each man was carrying 36 rounds of ammunition and rations for 3 days here. And so they're moving through the countryside here, and at first they were trying to maintain silence, but then they realized, that they had been discovered, that the country people, the people that lived in the countryside had been alerted there. So the British actually broke out their fifes and drums and began to march here. Marching on into Lexington. Lexington was 12 miles away, where they arrived there early in the morning here. Alrighty, now I want to share a couple of things with you here. When you go to Lexington, and I hope you do this, let me get my documents camera back up here. You'll see a statue in Lexington which represents the Minuteman. This is a citizen soldier here. This is put out by, I don't think it's put out by the National Park Service. It's just a brochure put out by the city of Lexington too. And if you look at this statue, which would be present there on Lexington Green, this represents our Minuteman. This represents our citizen soldier. It is the emblem today for the United States Army Reserve and for the National Guard here. Alrighty, so anyway, let me show you what Lexington Green appeared as back then and what it appears as now. So where these soldiers, these 77 Minutemen and Captain John Parker, were organized, where they were in double rows right along in this area here, and the British are going to be approaching from this area here. In other words, the British are coming up in this fashion right through here. So the vanguard of the 700 men was led by Major Pitcairn. Let me share a likeness here. This is the only likeness I have of John Pitcairn. You can't tell too much about it here. I was lucky to find this from some source anyway. I think he was a real hero here. And Major Pitcairn rode up with about 300 of the vanguard and ran up into the face of these Minutemen. These Minutemen were lined up here. Now, for Captain John Parker, he had his men together there, and when you go to Lexington Green today, you'll find this inscription carved on a rock, and I don't know if you can read that. You probably cannot. But the statement says, "Stand your ground, hold your fire, don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to start a war, let it start here." In the meantime, Major Pitcairn rode up into the face of the 77 Minutemen, and he told them, he was on horseback, he was brandishing a saber here, and he told him, he said, "Lay down your arms, you damn rebels, and disperse yourself, or you'll all be dead men." And Captain John Parker realized, greatly outnumbered, even at this point, it's 77 to 300, with another 400 that are coming along behind. Anyway, and so Captain John Parker told his men, he said, let's just disperse and try to disperse in an orderly fashion. And we really don't know what happened. It was another one of those scenarios, kind of like what took place at the Boston Massacre, in which, strangely enough, a shot was fired. Paul Revere, who was in the city, said he thought it was a pistol shot. But nonetheless, when that first shot was fired, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, the shot heard around the world. Then the British began a volley fire, and this volley fire into these patriots here. Alrighty, so anyway, they ended up killing, I think, 9 and wounding 10 of them. So those were the first shots of the American Revolution. Alright, now, it's not over. Remember now, the thing that the British was after right here, the British were trying to get Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Of course, they were unsuccessful in doing that. But the second thing that they were after was to destroy the weapons cache that was in Concord, which was 6 miles away. And so the British continued. They continued their march, and being very obvious in this too. And as they approached Concord, and I'm working upside down, so let me try to do this the best I can. And as they, let's see here, as they approached here, and I was looking for something and I don't see this, the British were coming down the road. That's not what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. I apologize for that. And the British were coming down the road in this fashion here. Like I said, about 700 of them. Back in Lexington, the second group of about 1,000 were present there. And as the British came in, such as this, the road into Concord divides. And you have a right-hand fork that goes in this direction and crosses the Concord River at the North Bridge. This is the North Bridge that's present here. And the other road, which will lead actually into Concord, which is just right here. It's not a very far distance away here now. Now, I've tried to draw it in appropriately for you folks, but this green here represents forest. So you had a lot of trees there then, and you have a lot of trees there even now. And so when the British came in, Lieutenant Colonel Smith, took 7 companies and told those 7 companies to go in this direction. And the major part of the group went in this direction here over into Concord to try to find the weapons caches. Now, where the 150 Minutemen were, which by now their numbers have grown to about 400, they were up at a place here called Punkatasset Ridge. Punkatasset Hill, this is where you'll find the visitor center here at Concord. And that's where the Minutemen were. Well, when we go back to the British over here, when they went into Concord, they very politely, they were going into houses, knocking on the doors of the houses. There were only women that were present there, women and children. And the British were very polite with this. And they just said, excuse me, madam, we need to check your house out to see if there are any weapons in here. And they actually found about 100,000 musket balls and took those down to the Concord River and dumped those in the Concord River. Later, the Patriots just went out and dredged them out, and they still had their 100,000 musket balls with that. And the British were unsuccessful in finding any weapons here, but they did find a couple of artillery chassis. In other words, not the barrels of the artillery piece, but just the undercarriage here. And they dragged those out into the street, and they set those on fire. So you can imagine this. We have a lot of smoke and flames that are going up into the air up here above Concord, and these 150 or perhaps 400 Minutemen are over at Punkatasset Hill. What do you think they're thinking here? Well, you know, and I would have some of you to tell me in class, they set the city on fire. They set Concord on fire. So these men went running down the hill here to cross the North Bridge. And concurrent with that, we had the British that were coming across the North Bridge here. But this is a narrow bridge. The bridge is quite narrow. The British were able to cross this bridge only 4 abreast with each other. Here's what the bridge looks like today here, and I'm sure that's a reconstruction of that. But we have the British meeting the Patriots, meeting these Minutemen right in the center of the bridge, and the British opened fire first and killed, I think it was three enlisted men, an officer, wounded about 3 or 4 men anyway. And that's when Major John Buttrick told those Minutemen, he said, "Fire, fellow soldiers, for God's sake, fire." And they did, and they fired, and they ended up taking the lives of a couple of British soldiers and wounding a number of them too. All right, so with that in mind here, now the British began to, and it's not really a good word to say retreat, but the British began to reform and make their way back towards Boston itself. This is 18 miles away, 19 miles away, and I will tell you, good folks, it was every British soldier's nightmare. And what the Minutemen were doing now, and their numbers have now grown to about 1,100. Now, I'm just going to use this for an example here. And for these Minutemen had positioned themselves on either side of the road. They were in barns. They were in the lofts of the barns. They were hiding in trees. They were behind trees. They were behind fences here. And they were just taking sniper shots at these British soldiers as they were making this nightmarish march back into Boston itself. And as the British numbers were falling, the Minutemen numbers were increasing. every step of the way. Even Colonel Smith, he was wounded too. The thing that saved the day is as these British soldiers retreated back through Lexington, that was the time in which Lord Percy's 1,000-man British Army force actually arrived there, and they were able to form a shield to allow those British soldiers under Colonel Smith and Major John Pitcairn to actually retreat back into Boston here. All right. At the end of the day, here's the results here. The British had 73 killed, 174 wounded, 26 missing, and 273 casualties. For the American losses, it was 49 killed, 41 wounded, 5 missing, 95 casualties. So it certainly was an American victory there. All right, let me share a couple of other things here, folks. That basically wraps up our lecture here. Let's see here. Let me put a little contrast on this. Here's an artist's rendering showing Lexington, the battle that took place at Lexington when the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired. We can see Captain John Parker and his 77 Minutemen, which are closest to you, and we can see the British soldiers over there. And I am presuming here that this is Major Pitcairn, Major John Pitcairn, that is present there. Let's see what else I might have for you folks here. And I want to share, this is out of a magazine, and share a couple things with you, try to tie this together. Where Paul Revere was rowed across was here. All right, and this was the route in which Paul Revere, the alarm rider, and also the route in which the British would take under John Pitcairn, moving up towards Menotomy and on into Lexington. And for the alarm rider, William Dawes Jr., he would ride in this fashion here, and it was also the same path in which Lord Percy's 1,000-man force that actually saved the whole affair there. All right, let me flip over to the continuation map here. We'll pick it up over here in this area. Let's see where Concord is located here. Concord, here, I'm sorry, I was in the wrong direction. Here's Lexington, and on where Paul Revere was captured here. You can go to that very site today. This is a fun place to visit here. And the old road, the old route is still right there. You can walk down it if you wish to do so. But the British went here, such as this. This is where they split the force here, crossing the North Bridge. Some went into Concord itself. And oh, by the way, I don't see it on the map right here, but if you go south of Concord, down in this area here, some of you may be familiar with Henry David Thoreau's Walden, and that's where Walden Pond is located, which is a fun place to visit, and I'll tell you about that. A few lectures down the road here, folks, when we get into the 1840s anyway. And this, of course, is the retreat route that the British took back into Lexington, where Lord Percy's army was present right there. All right, so anyway, that's fun stuff here, folks. Let's see what else I want to mention to you about this and get this out of the way here. Now, the weapon that was used by the British, and the weapon that was used by the Minutemen, and the Minutemen were furnished these weapons by the British, as you know, for colonial militia, and now they're going to be using them against the British itself. But this weapon was known as a Brown Bess musket. It is a 75 caliber. It fires a 75 caliber bullet. And if you look at these British soldiers here, this is an ammo pouch. You can see the ammo pouch here. And within that ammo pouch, you may have as many as 25 to 30 of these little packets. This is what the packet looks like. It's encased in paper here. And if you look at this portion here, this is a designated amount of gunpowder, black powder. And then we have one musket ball. So what you have to do, you pull one of these out of your ammo pouch here, and then you bite the top of this off with your teeth, with your central incisors, and then you're holding the barrel up, and then the gunpowder is introduced here into the barrel here, and then the musket ball is placed here also into the barrel. This is a ramrod, and then the ramrod will seat the musket ball into place, and we go back here with the hammer, and we go to half cock, then full cock, and then you level the weapon and you fire that weapon here. All right, now the type of bullet that they used here was a 75 caliber musket ball, if I can get it to stop rolling around here. But that's what it looks like, and it's a big slug here. I'm going to place a dime right next to it so you can use your perspective right there and see that it's a large slug. Now, this Brown Bess musket was notoriously inaccurate. You've heard this saying, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. Well, that's pretty good advice if you're using a brown bess musket. Only 300 of 300 shots fired, only one would reach its mark. So it was not a very effective weapon here. And it was more like using a BB gun, where you just had to kind of aim 6 inches to the left and 3 inches over or 3 inches under if you hope to hit your target with that. All right, so anyway, it's a fun place to visit there. I want to show you at last here a photograph of a British soldier, typical British type soldier. He's carrying a brown bess musket here. And, of course, the officers' hats and the enlisted hats are different. And so the Patriots learn very easily, and we'll talk about this next time we get together. And the Patriots learn to, you snipe. You take your first shots at the officers because you can recognize the officers by the type of headgear that they have there. All right, so we're going to stop for the time being. As I said, it's a short lecture here. I do want to get a review in for you folks today, so we're going to stop for right now. And I hope you like that, and I hope you take the time in the future to visit Lexington and Concord and Boston. Wonderful places to visit. Okay, thank you.